Hello and welcome to Old School Memories. I'm your host, Lewis Carlin, and we're part of the Tapped Out Wrestling Podcast Network. And this week, on this installment, I should say, of Old School Memories, we're going to discuss Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino in 1980. And, man, I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember this like it was yesterday, man. And much like the previous episode of Old School Memories where we talked about the big turn of 1980, this one was also a big turn from 1980. Larry Zbyszko turning on Bruno Sammartino. And, you know, Bruno Sammartino got me into professional wrestling. I became a professional wrestling fan because of Bruno Sammartino. As my grandfather, huge Bruno fan from the 60s. Religiously watched professional wrestling on Channel 9 on midnight. He would stay up and watch wrestling, and Bruno was his favorite. He loved Bruno, and he got me into professional wrestling. My Bruno Sammartino and my grandfather. My grandfather introduced me to Bruno, and Bruno was everything to me growing up. I loved Bruno Sammartino, and back in East Meadow, Long Island, where I watched a lot of my wrestling as a kid. I remember, you know, Larry Zbyszko was always a fan favorite. You know, teamed with Tony Garea. They were tag team champions. He had a kind of a minor singles push as a babyface, but nothing too major. And I remember him coming on saying that he wanted to face Bruno. He needed to prove himself. He was Bruno's student, and basically he's a student, and Bruno the teacher. And he needed to prove himself, because I guess he wanted to prove himself to Bruno. And a few weeks went by, and he wanted to wrestle Bruno, and Bruno kept saying no, he doesn't want to wrestle him, and then finally, Larry Zbyszko was basically begging Bruno, please, I need to prove myself. If you don't want to wrestle me, then I'm going to quit professional wrestling. And Bruno finally relented and said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll have a match with you, but I'm not going in there to hurt you, and I'm not going in there to win. I'm just going in there, to wrestle because you want to wrestle me. So he agreed to the match, and there we had Bruno Sammartino, one-on-one with Larry Zbyszko on TV, and you know, I was excited. To me, as a kid, again, I'm 11 years old, thinking it's two baby faces, two friends meeting in the ring, gonna have a scientific match, you know, a lot of scientific holds. You know, didn't really think anything of it. Didn't think anything was gonna really happen between the two, but oh man, I was wrong, as we know now. 38 years later, I was wrong. I was wrong about that. But I remember watching. I remember looking forward to it and watching the match, and luckily it was on in the afternoon. I had to stay up to midnight, and they showed watching the WWF. I forgot what time. It might have came on at noon or 2 o'clock. And I remember my grandfather was not as trusting as I was. I remember him saying, I don't trust that Larry Zbyszko. He's going to do something to my Bruno. And I was like, no, they're friends, Grandpa. You know, we would talk on the phone, and he's like, I don't know, Louie. He'd have this raspy voice. I don't know, Louie. I'm going to do my grandfather's voice. I don't know, Louie. I don't trust that Larry Zbyszko. He's going to do something to Bruno. I was like, no, he's not going to do anything to Bruno, Grandpa. And so then the match took place, watching the episode, and then the match started, I remember, and it was just scientific, like I thought. You know, Larry Zbyszko would get on a hold, and Bruno would counter it, and then Bruno would get a hold on, and Zbyszko wasn't able to escape, and Bruno would let him go. And you could see this was getting Zbyszko was getting more and more upset as the match went on. And I think he got upset. He started yelling at Bruno. And once he started yelling at Bruno, I'm thinking, something is not right here. Why is he getting upset at Bruno? Bruno is just having a match, right? And Bruno is not going to go out there and hurt him. He gets on a hold. He's going to let him go. And that's what Bruno was doing. But the match went on, and there was one point Larry Zbyszko had a hammerlock on Bruno, and Bruno kind of reversed it, and Zbyszko fell out of the ring. And here comes the turn. Larry Zbyszko. I'll never forget Larry Zbyszko. Bruno Sammartino is holding the ropes open for Zbyszko. Larry comes in, and he kicks Bruno. and Vince McMahon, who was announcing at the time, he just went, uh-oh, and he kicked Bruno, and he started pounding on Bruno, and I'm like, what is he doing? I couldn't believe what was going on. I'm like, what is Zbyszko doing to Bruno? And he started pounding on him, and he's hurting him. He threw him into the turnbuckle, and he went out, and he got a chair, and I'm holding my head, again, 11-year-old kid, I'm holding my head at the time, going, no, Larry, no, don't. Yeah, and he said a referee, Dick Worley, tries to stop him, and he shoves Dick Worley to the ground or out of the ring, and he takes the chair, and he hits Bruno Sammartino over the head with the chair, and at that point, I'm like, what are you doing, Larry? No, you just screwed yourself. I don't think I said screw, but I'm thinking, I couldn't believe what Larry Zbyszko was doing to Bruno, and then he hit Bruno again, and Bruno was bleeding, and McMahon is like, Bruno is bleeding profusely, he's bleeding profusely, and he hit him again with the chair, and Bruno just knocked out. At one point, the second, Bruno trying to make a comeback, and then Zbyszko hit him a third time and knocked him out. And Bruno's laid out, and the crowd is booing, and at that moment I had such hatred for Larry Zbyszko. And I'm thinking, my grandfather was right. He didn't trust Zbyszko. I trusted him, and my grandfather didn't, and he was right, and I can't believe what Zbyszko did, and Bruno was just lying there in a pool of blood, and Zbyszko leaves the ring, and man, I was in a state of shock. I was in a state of shock watching this on TV, and remember I ran to call my grandfather, and I said, Grandpa, did you see what happened? And he sounded so distraught. He was like, Louie, Bruno's gonna kill him. Bruno was gonna kill him, Louie. And I legitimately got scared, right? I'm thinking Bruno Sammartino is legitimately gonna try to kill Larry Zbyszko now, because my grandfather said it, and my grandfather was one of my heroes. Anything he said, I believe. So he said, Bruno, because he knew Bruno a lot more than I did. He said, Bruno's gonna kill him, Louie. Bruno's gonna kill him. I told you I didn't trust that Larry Zbyszko. And Larry Zbyszko became the wrestler I hated more than anything. I was been watching wrestling for about 3 years up to that point, and I haven't hated anybody as much as up to that point, and as much as I hated Larry Zbyszko for what he did to Bruno Sammartino. And I knew Bruno was going to get his revenge, and I was in a state of shock for like a day or two, just thinking about poor Bruno getting hit over the head with a chair over and over again by Larry Zbyszko. And I remember they came back, they went to a commercial break, and they came back. I remember Tony Atlas in the ring, and there was still a pool of blood on Bruno's blood was still on the mat. I remember Tony Atlas was in next, and he looked down at the pool of blood, and then like he was in a state of shock, and and my grandfather saying Bruno was going to kill him, and I remember about 2 months later I had gotten I think it was Pro Wrestling Illustrated, and on the cover of the magazine was Larry Zbyszko, his foot caught in the ropes, and he's sitting down, and Bruno has his hands around Larry Zbyszko's throat, and the caption reads Bruno, and in quotation said, I tried to kill Larry Zbyszko. And I'm like, oh my God, my grandfather was right. Bruno was gonna literally kill Larry Zbyszko. And, again, I hated the man. I didn't want anyone to be killed. I kind of felt bad, but I didn't want anyone to be killed, but I hated Larry Zbyszko. I mean, there was another wrestling magazine that came out. The magazines I would get were Pro Wrestling Illustrated, The Wrestler, and Inside Wrestling. And one of the issues came out, and Larry Zbyszko, saying, why have all my friends turn against me? I remember reading the article, and Zbyszko saying, that Ivan Putski used to come over, with like Polish sausage, and I think it was Tony Gurria or Dominic DiNucci. One of them made like a terrific coleslaw, and Zbyszko saying that I'm a sucker for a good slaw, and he would have these big, extravagant barbecues, and all the babyface wrestlers would come over, but no one's coming over anymore. And he was wondering why all his friends turned against him. And I remember reading that thinking, how dare Larry Zbyszko question why all his friends turned against him? We all know damn well why all his friends turned against him is because he attacked Bruno. I remember going to my grandfather's house, a week later, and we're talking about it, and he's like, oh, I can't wait for Bruno to get his hands on Zbyszko. I can't wait for Bruno to get his hands on Zbyszko. You know, this affected my grandfather, because he idolized Bruno Sammartino. Bruno was his guy. Since Buddy Rogers was defeated by Bruno in '62, Bruno was my grandfather's guy, and I don't think he was ever attacked like that by anybody. And my grandfather, you know, I think if my grandfather saw Zbyszko walking down the street, my grandfather, who was a tough guy, he got into a number of scraps in his younger days, and he never lost a fight, my grandfather, from what I understand. He was in the Navy, he was a very, very strong guy, and he never lost a fight. Growing up, and I think he would have went after Zbyszko if he saw Zbyszko coming down the street, and he's walking down the street, even though he was in his 60s at the time. He would have challenged Zbyszko to a street fight, in my opinion. He would have done well. I don't know if he would have won, but he would have done well. But we all know Bruno got his revenge. It all led up to the steel cage match, which my grandfather it was at Shea Stadium, which my grandfather wanted to go to, but for some reason or another, which I can't remember, he wasn't able to make it. But yeah, it was that was the big turn. As I remember it. As I watch it now, you can see, you know, Dick Worley handing Bruno the blade, and him blading, and then putting the blade into his shorts. You know, as a kid, you know, you didn't notice those things, but as you watch it now, as an adult, as you're a little smarter, you see that happening. But, yeah, Larry Zbyszko, turning a Bruno Sammartino, 1980. I remember it well. And that's it. And that's it for this edition of Old School Memories. I'm your host, Lewis Carlin. Until next time, thank you very much for listening. Take care, bye-bye, and stay safe, everyone. So long.